Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this Friday afternoon. In where I am is snowing, so probably where you are, maybe you're safe at home, or whatever you are away from the snow. Or if you like the snow, it's okay as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Today, we're going to talk about Japanese beetles, and this is the third webinar about what's killing your plants that we have this spring. As a reminder, Colorado State University is an equal opportunity provider. And if you have any questions, please feel free to go onto our website or take a picture of the QR code and have any questions or concerns, and we're here to help you. These are just some webinar housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded and we will post it online on the planttalk.org website under the webinar tab. You can see past webinars as well as register for upcoming webinars in that website. And today we will be using the Q&A feature. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in there and we'll do our best to answer them. This is just as a reminder to register for upcoming webinars. The next week, we're going to talk about pest management in the Western Slope specifically, and that's going to be a very good webinar talking on some of the aspects that some of the diseases and pests that you have there, but what are they doing to preserve that agriculture part in the Western Slope? You can follow the link or the QR code again to register for the webinars. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start, and I'm going to let the speakers introduce themselves today. I'm going to do things a little bit different, but Tom Fradkin and myself, Mario Ortiz Castro, will be in the background answering questions, and we hope that you have a good time learning about Japanese beetles today. So Lisa and Mel, please take it away, and thank you for being here.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, I think my screen is shared. Thank you for being here today. We're excited to talk to you about Japanese beetles. We know Japanese beetles can be a nuisance in so many parts of the state. So let's dive right in. Today we're going to start with an introduction with me and my co-presenter Melissa, and then I'm going to talk about the statewide picture, life cycle, lookalikes, and management of Japanese beetles in the lawns and the landscape. Melissa's going to talk about the rose study, biocontrols, which is a little bit of hope, and some history, especially about the history in Western Colorado, and current efforts in Grand Junction. So I'll turn it over to Melissa real quick.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name's Mel or Melissa Schreiner. I serve as the Tri River Area Extension Entomologist, and I also am recently admitted into a PhD program within the College of Agricultural Sciences in the Agricultural Biology Department. And I run a research and education program in Western Colorado. And yeah, it's a real privilege to be following up to Lisa's presentation, introducing you to Japanese beetles today. We'll cover different perspectives from around the state of Colorado today. We realize that management, massively differs depending on where you live. So please keep that in mind throughout the talk. But looking forward to it. Take it away, Lisa.
Okay, and I'm Lisa Mason. I'm a horticulture specialist with a background in entomology. I'm out of the Arapahoe County Extension Office, which is the South Denver area. And I get to teach people about plants and insects. I do want to highlight two efforts that we have going on this summer. If you're interested in pollinators and learning more about bees, you can participate as a community scientist in nativebeewatch.org. And we're also partnering with the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. They are doing a 5-year statewide biodiversity study. And so if you're interested in sharing your biodiversity observations this summer, I highly recommend getting involved. It's going to be very exciting. If you're not familiar with CSU Extension, we are the outreach branch of the university and have an office in nearly every county. If you're not familiar with your county extension office, please reach out, look at programming offered in your area. This is a map showing all of our offices around the state of Colorado. Notice the two hearts, Arapahoe County and Grand Junction, because that is where Melissa and I are housed. And from a horticulture perspective, services we offer are plant diagnostics. If you have a sick tree or your lawn's not doing well, maybe you have grasshoppers or maybe your tomatoes have a weird disease, you can reach out to your county extension office for assistance. We also, on a limited case basis, can do on-site consultations. We'll field all your questions, and we offer public programs and presentations like today. Pictured here are master gardeners in Arapahoe County. They were actually assisting with Japanese beetle counts for some research that was conducted by Dr. Cranshaw. This was a few years ago now, but they were so into counting those beetles. All right. Before I dive into the life cycle and biology, I want to, Melissa alluded to this earlier, talk about how Japanese beetle is now a state of Colorado issue. For a long time, it's just been in the certain parts of the Front Range, and I think as individual homeowners, we all focus on our individual plants and what can I do, in my backyard. But I would encourage you to think bigger and how this is a statewide issue when it comes to Japanese beetle management. And you'll hear Melissa and I refer to the Colorado Front Range. This is how you manage Japanese beetles in the Front Range. This is how you manage Japanese beetles in Grand Junction, because there are different strategies. And so do pay attention to that. And, really, a couple of the big picture messages are don't transport plant material. That sadly is how Japanese beetles arrived back in Grand Junction through infested turf grass. So plant, buy local, plant local. And I think with an invasive species like this, we're going to have to rethink what our landscapes look like. And I'm going to dive into that on different plant options and things like that, because sadly, at least for the Colorado Front Range, Japanese beetles are likely here to stay. So we got to think about how we can maybe plant other options that the beetles will not feed on. So just keep that in mind throughout the presentation today. All right, Japanese beetles. This pest is a problem because there's two life stages that are damaging. With a lot of our pests, it's only one life stage, but here we have Japanese beetle larvae that feed on our turf grass and the adults that can feed on a variety of plants. So that also requires different management strategies to try and manage the turf grass with the grubs and also plants in our landscape when the adults are flying. And this beetle is very mobile. They can fly up to 1 to 5 miles on its own, and they will seek out plants that look appetizing to them. Adults live about 45 to 60 days. We start to notice Japanese beetles, depending on the weather, anywhere from the end of June, 4th of July timeframe, potentially through into September. The female beetles will feed on plant material during the day, and then she will lay her eggs in the evening. She will burrow in about 2 to 3 inches of soil, and she can lay up to 40 to 60 eggs in her lifetime. And this is key. Eggs must have completely moist conditions to survive. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Here's an overview of what their life cycle is. So here we are in March and April. This past winter, the grubs were deep in the soil, protected from the elements and the weather. As the soil starts to warm up, those grubs are going to crawl to the top of the soil. It's possible, they'll do some light feeding during this time frame, but usually we see damage to the lawn later in their life cycle. The adults, they'll complete their metamorphosis, and the adults will emerge from the turf grass soil and begin feeding on our plants. So we're going to see this damage to landscape plants at that end of June through August and even into September. Now, if you do have a heavy presence of grubs in your grass, you're likely to start to see damage late July into August. That's also the hottest time of the year. So we see a lot of brown turf grass during this time frame. Maybe it's grubs, maybe not. We'll talk more about that. Now, there are a lot of lookalikes of Japanese beetles in Colorado. This is just a small number. And so identification is key here because not all green insects are created equal. We even have, green metallic sweat bees. We have some wasps that are metallic green. So keep in mind, a lot of beneficial insects are also green. Few I'll point out here. The hairy bear beetle, that's associated with juniper trees. You may come across them. Right now, I was actually just at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, and there were so many green tiger beetles. That's always a fun insect to see in the landscape. The dogbane beetle, you'll see that in the summertime associated with dogbane plants. And so when you're looking at a metallic green insect, for Japanese beetles, their head and their thorax are that bright metallic green. Their elytra, the hard shell wings on their back, are usually a metallic brown, reddish gold color. And then they have these white tufts all along their abdomen. So those white tufts are key. And another insect that is often confused with Japanese beetles, we get questions on it all the time, is the bumble flower beetle here in the bottom left-hand corner. The bumble flower beetle. Well, actually, real quick, see those white tufts on the bottom of the beetle? That's a good ID characteristic. The bumble flower beetle is often confused with Japanese beetles because they're related. They are both scarab beetles common in our landscape. Bumble flower beetles are native. You're likely to see grubs feeding on decaying matter for this bumble flower beetle. So the question to the extension office is, I found all these grubs in my compost pile or in my perennial garden. How do I get rid of them? Are they Japanese beetles? And if they're in a compost pile or in a perennial garden, I know instantly it's not Japanese beetles because Japanese beetles feed exclusively on turf grass. And so that's a key characteristic. If you come across C-shaped grubs, if it's not in turf grass, it is not Japanese beetles. You'll see the adult beetles feed on pollen and nectar and flowers over ripe fruit. They are harmless. They're a decomposing insect, so they can actually even be considered beneficial. Now, here we have a Japanese beetle larva. I'm just kidding. They aren't nearly that big, but I love to share that picture because it's so impressive. Japanese beetles, at their largest stage, they actually only grow to about half an inch long. So you can see they go through a few different instars before they pupate, and once they're the largest form, they're about a half an inch long. And that C-shaped grub is a characteristic for Japanese beetles and other scarabs. If you really want to know what species of beetle you have, if you find grubs in your landscape, I recommend calling the extension office. We'll identify it for you. But if you're really into it yourself, if you have access to a microscope, the way you identify species of these grubs is by looking at the tip of their abdomen. Each species has a different pattern of hair that identifies that particular grub. For Japanese beetles, we notice a V shape of hairs right at the tip of their abdomen. Promise you don't have to do that. Just call us and we'll help you out. Okay, so let's dive into management. Um, like I said, Japanese beetles can harm turfgrass as grubs and adults in the lawn. So let's dive into grubs in the lawn. They can be in high numbers a pretty serious pest in golf courses, parks, and even home lawns, just due to the nature that we keep our grass well watered pretty consistently in a lot of those areas. The grubs will feed on the roots, and that severs the roots from the plant, and so over time, the turf grass will not be able to uptake any water. So it'll slowly start to brown. Damage will become more prevalent during hot and dry summer months. And Kentucky bluegrass and creeping bentgrass are usually the most damaged from Japanese beetles feeding. Other cool season turf grass also can be damaged. And you'll see this general browning occur in your landscape, but turf grass can turn brown for a lot of different reasons. So another reason why identification is key. In areas where there's a heavy presence of grubs, you can actually do something called a tug test. The tug test is where you tug on the turf grass. If it starts to peel up, chances are that turf grass is not rooted into the ground. So that would be an indicator of grubs. And after you lift up that turf grass, you're likely to see those grubs as well. If your turf grass is well rooted into the ground, you won't be able to just peel it up. Maybe you have small numbers of grubs or you don't have grubs at all. Um, this is key, especially if you're well, actually anywhere in the state of Colorado. Japanese beetle eggs will only survive in turf grass that is consistently irrigated. That soil has to stay wet for those eggs and those small grubs to survive. So an easy management tool that you can use is consider drying out your lawn in July and August as the eggs start to hatch. Now, when I say dry out the lawn, that doesn't mean stop watering altogether, at least if you're along the Colorado Front Range. But watch the moisture in your turf grass. Get a moisture meter, use a screwdriver in the soil, and learn when the turf grass is wet and when the turf grass is dry. Because if you wait to water and make sure that turf grass, the top 2 to 3 inches, is dry before you water again, chances are that the grubs will have a much harder chance to survive if that soil can dry out a couple of inches before you water next. Now, turf grass needs a lot of water. We get really hot temperatures, so that can be a tricky thing. But most of us, we turn on our irrigation system, it runs in the middle of the night, and then we forget about it. But being mindful of watering can really make a difference, especially if you have grubs in your turf grass. Healthy turf grass is another key to not only it won't prevent Japanese beetles from nesting there, but your turf grass will be able to withstand more damage. And so you want that turf grass to be as healthy as you can, and that comes down to good cultural care practices. Some things you can do. Make sure you're fertilizing in the fall. That fertilization in the fall prioritizes nutrients to the root growth, not the top growth, because it's fall going into winter. So that right there will make your turf grass stronger for the following year. Core aeration, in addition to watering, is one of the best things you can do for your lawn because plants need oxygen in the roots too. And what happens is when you core aerate, you're giving the roots a chance to grow deeper and grow stronger. Core aeration is so important. And another thing that can help is make sure you're mowing high. 2.5 to 3 inches all year round. You want to set that mower. And what happens is when you mow high, the roots are going to be thicker and stronger. And the more roots you have in the turf grass, the more the turf grass can tolerate feeding from Japanese beetles. Mowing less than 2 inches, again, you're not going to have those stronger roots. And you're also going to decrease your turf grass tolerance to other things like drought. And, potentially you may have an increased weed prevalence as well. And one more thing to note about irrigation too. Irrigation audits at least once a year. You can do it yourself. That is one of the best things you can do to make sure your irrigation system is applying water uniformly. Because quite often we all have irrigation gaps in our irrigation systems, and they're only visible through an irrigation audit. So go get plastic cups at the grocery store. They're, a couple bucks. Set those cups around your landscape. Run your irrigation system and compare the cups. If you have one cup that has a half an inch of water, and one cup that has a quarter of an inch of water, consider that cup with a half an inch of water gets twice the amount of water as the other cup. And during a hot season, that really adds up and can contribute to drought stress in your turf. So, good cultural care practices. Look at that irrigation system. Okay, I'm going to talk about some pesticide options to apply to your turf grass if you have grubs. Now, along the Colorado Front Range, if you're in the Denver area, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs, really we only recommend applying grub control if you know you have grubs in your landscape. If you're not sure, contact your extension office and we'll help you troubleshoot the issue. And Melissa will talk more about efforts for turfgrass in Grand Junction. Okay, basic pesticides. The label is the law. You always want to read the label because it's federal law, and if you're spending money and time on applying these products, you want to make sure they are applied as efficiently as possible and as safely as possible. So read that pesticide label and note the active ingredients. Pesticides are sold under a variety of trade names, even if it's the same active ingredient. And so you know exactly what you're applying. Look at that active ingredient. And if you have questions about what you're applying, the National Pesticide Information Center is a fantastic resource to learn more about products that you apply in your landscape. Nematodes. Okay, so here's a few options for grub control. Nematodes are available for purchase at garden centers. You mix them with water and you water the lawn with them. There's a couple of different options. Typically this cruiser option is more effective because they're mobile and they will seek out those grubs. They enter through the body openings and eventually kill that grub. And so if you're interested in nematodes, make sure you get the ratio right so you can apply this to your lawn. They are living organisms, so they actually need to be refrigerated. And you're going to want to apply these when the grubs are active. This coincides with when the adults are active too. They need those warm soil temperatures to be effective. These are fast acting, so they'll control those grubs within the first few days of application. And if you happen to come across any dead grubs, they'll turn this reddish brown color. This can be a great option for grub control. One option that's widely available that is not effective, don't buy this one. This is milky spore. Research has shown time and time again that it really will only kill 2 to 3% of the grubs in the landscape. Over time, this product can build up in the lawn, but even then, best case scenario where there's presence of a lot of the milky spore, it may only kill up to like 5% or even less of the grubs. So, usually we give people all options and you share the pros and cons, but this one just really isn't all that effective. Another option that is effective is another BT product, Bacillus thuringiensis, the variety Galleria, and I apologize, I don't say that quite right, but so it's the best I got. This is marketed as Grub Gone or Grub Juice. This has a short residual activity, and it is best used after most the eggs have hatched, and that the grubs are tiny. So this is going to be mid-July through mid-August or so, and it kills the grubs by impacting their gut. So the grubs cannot survive after that. Another great option is Celiprin. This is also another very effective product on grubs. It has a very long persistence and moves through the soil slowly. And so because of that long persistence, it is actually best applied in May or June. Some control will be possible if you make that application in April or even like late July, early August, but May or June is going to be that optimal time frame. And it moves slowly, and it also moves systemically through the plants. And that means the roots are going to uptake that product. This is also a great option because it's not hazardous to bees and it's very low hazard to humans and pets as well. There are other grub control products out there, and two of them are neonic pesticides. And this is important to note because last year, a new state law went into effect on July 1st and classifies neonic pesticides as limited use pesticides. This means neonics can only be sold by licensed pesticide dealers. And if they don't have a license, you're not going to find these products on the shelf. So imidacloprid is a great example of one that you will no longer find at your big box stores or on Amazon or anything like that. So you have to find a licensed pesticide dealer. The Colorado Department of Agriculture actually has a list of licensed dealers on their website. And you can filter by county as well. So you can find dealers and still purchase those products in those areas. And consider all the other options you have available as well. Okay, switching gears, that was Japanese beetles in the turf grass. I'm gonna pause. Actually, I'm gonna keep going so I can get through some slides and then I'll come back for questions. Okay, Japanese beetles in the landscape. The adults feed on vegetation, and they can actually feed on over 300 types of vegetation in the landscape. And what happens is one beetle starts feeding, and that releases, the plant releases a scent that attracts more beetles. And what you get is something called aggregation feeding. And so you'll get more and more beetles on that same plant continuing to feed. Usually beetles will start at the top of the plant and work their way down. And yeah, aggregation feeding is really what damages plants. Here's an example of that aggregation feeding from the top down. So what can you do with adults in the landscape? Pheromone traps are widely available, but they are not very effective at controlling beetle populations. I know, it's so satisfying to see hundreds of beetles in those traps, but you're not really impacting the population, and you may even be hurting your own plants. And again, I want to make sure this is for the Front Range. You'll hear about efforts in Grand Junction here in a little bit. But along the Front Range, the populations are so well established that the traps really aren't going to do any good. And it's also important to note that pheromone traps weren't developed for control efforts. They were developed to detect the presence of an insect, of that pest in the landscape. So they're great when you're doing research and you want to know the presence of that insect, but in terms of control, where Japanese beetles are so widely established along the Front Range, you're not going to do any good. And in fact, you may attract more beetles to your plants. So if you have a neighbor or you're insistent on using traps, the best thing you can do is make sure those traps are at least 30 feet away from any plants that the beetles will feed on, because you don't want to attract more beetles to your own plants, and tell your neighbors that too. So if they're insistent on using traps, make sure they're far away from any valuable plants, because otherwise you'll just attract more beetles. That pheromone is strong. It works really well. So pheromone traps are not an effective tool. Handpicking is an effective tool, and I know that's tedious, and it's a chore, but because you can handpick beetles off your individual plants, you can actually protect your own plants from some of that aggregation feeding. So the best thing you can do when the mornings, it's cool in the mornings, it's cool in the evenings, get a bowl of soapy water and knock those beetles into the bowl of soapy water. The soapy water will help prevent them from flying out. And when the weather's cooler, they're going to be slower at moving too. So that's really the optimal time. This is a myth, but squishing them will not release any pheromones that attracts more beetles. So that was a myth that went around for a long time, that if you squish beetles, you'll attract more. You can squish to your heart's content. That will not attract any more beetles. And get those beetles into a bucket of soapy water. If you have chickens, this is a great source of food for your chickens. Okay, there are insecticide products that you can apply to plants in the landscape. And there's pros and cons, of course, to every product. The fact sheet outlines the pros and cons and the pesticide options. One thing to keep in mind is many of the insecticide options are hazardous to pollinators. So if you have blooming flowers on your plant, you cannot apply those products to those blooming plants. So it's so important to be mindful of that. One option that is pollinator safe is acelepryn. Now we talked about acelepryn as a grub control, and that is feasible, affordable, a great option. Acelepryn as a foliar spray is really expensive, and that price right there is actually a few years old now, so I'm sure it's even more. It's super expensive and not always a feasible option for a homeowner unless you're sharing it with your neighbors and you all go in. And it only lasts about a week, so it will slowly degrade in the sun. And keep in mind, Grub X acelepryn is labeled only for use in the lawn. This other acelepryn is labeled for foliar use. Another product that is very effective against those adults and safe for pollinators and safe for organic gardens is this BT product marketed as Beetle Gone or Beetle Juice. And the adults will feed on this and it'll basically like give them a tummy ache and they will stop feeding on the plants. And so the beetles will still crawl around for a while, but they're sick. They actually can't eat and they'll die like a few days later. So if you still see them crawling around, that means, the product is still probably working. This is also a foliar spray and only lasts for about 2 to 3 days. And if it rains or anything, you're going to have to reapply for that. And this is safe for bees. So other insecticides that are available as like foliar sprays that you apply to a plant, make sure you read that label, especially since Japanese beetles feed on a lot of our vegetables. And if you plan to consume the vegetables from your garden, make sure you know what you're applying to your garden. And remember also that neonics are limited use, so they aren't going to be as readily available as some of the other options. So check out the fact sheet, outlines all the options. And remember, protect those pollinators. Okay, I'm gonna fly through. We know what plants the Japanese beetles feed on. They're oftentimes some of our favorites. And this is a reminder that if you're replacing plants or you're adding new plants to the landscape, or maybe you're just really tired of picking Japanese beetles off your roses, there are so many great options for plants to add to your landscape that are Japanese beetles resistant. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Crab apples. Crab apples they are preferred by Japanese beetles. However, there are varieties that the Japanese beetles will not feed on. So check out different varieties of crab apples. And because crab apples bloom so early in the season, the flowers are done by the time the adult beetles are active. So in the middle of the summer when the tree just has leaves on it, that could open up the possibility for other insecticide use because you won't have flowers blooming at that time. Purdue has a great fact sheet on crabapple trees that are resistant to Japanese beetles. So crabapple trees can be a great tree for the landscape. If you are interested in other trees that are beetle resistant, do check out the Front Range tree recommendation list. It talks about trees that grow really well in Colorado and considerations when picking out a tree. You'll want to also, if you're considering adding a new tree, make sure right plant, right place. Make sure you have an irrigation plan. Consider the mature height. A lot of factors that go into this. So contact your extension office if you have more questions. Linden trees, sadly, are another favorite for Japanese beetles. Linden trees are so beautiful. They have such a perfect shape and they are a pollinator magnet. But if you have Japanese beetles in your area, it may not be the best choice. Little leaf linden, American linden are both very susceptible. Silver linden is less susceptible, but it's also hard to find too. Evergreen trees. Beetles do not like evergreen trees. So that can be a great addition for the landscape. It's great for wildlife habitats. Just remember to apply supplemental water for all your trees and shrubs all year round to give them the best chance at growing successfully. Other tree options that you could add: tulip tree, a variety of oaks, red buds. That's my personal favorite. Box elder tree. And make sure, especially like with maples, make sure you select a tree that will grow well in Colorado. For instance, maples are often susceptible to iron chlorosis, so may not be the best choice. There's also a great variety of shrubs too, lilacs, forsythias. They're blooming right now, actually. Spirea is a one that blooms later in the summer. All good options that Japanese beetles dislike. And of course, we have a wide variety of perennials. Native perennials too, native plants, often most are not susceptible to Japanese beetles too. Apache plume is, and potentilla can be susceptible too, but so many of the other native plant options or other perennial options are not attractive for Japanese beetles. There's also a wide variety of annuals that are not attractive either. And at the end, we'll share a resources page. And that resources page, we actually have lists that were combined by our colleague John Morgul in Douglas County about which plants are more susceptible in Colorado and which plants are less susceptible. So stay tuned for that resource at the end. So when you're thinking about the landscape, think big. Think beyond just picking beetles off your trees or off your plants. Consider your goals. Are your goals in the landscape to maybe not only reduce the presence of Japanese beetles, but save water? Maybe you want to support pollinators or create bird habitats. All those goals can be achieved by looking at beetle-resistant plants. Consider your turf grass. Where do you actively use your turf grass? Maybe you have kids playing or you throw a frisbee for your dog. That's a great reason to have turf grass. But maybe there's some areas of turf grass that are, not doing well. You're not using them. And you could plant some drought tolerant perennials resistant to Japanese beetles. Other planting options, you want to make sure it's the right plant or the right tree for the right place. Consider irrigation in all aspects because healthier plants can withstand more beetle damage. And you could consider mulches to support plant growth, tree growth, reduce turf grass, and mulch can often be an added aesthetic. So think big and maybe rethink about how your landscape looks that can benefit you the most. And I love this diagram real quick. If you are rethinking your landscape, print out something from Google Earth and map out what you want in certain places of your landscape. And this can help you achieve your goals. All right, I'm gonna take a quick question. Milky spore, does the effectiveness number apply to other climate zones? I often see testimonials from the East Coast saying it's a miracle. Anne, I'm gonna have to double check on that. And maybe Melissa might know the answer. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I would be happy to look into it for you. All right, let's turn it over to Melissa.
Okay, I will share my screen. Just give me one moment here. And to chime in, I'm not sure about the efficacy of milky spore even on the East Coast, so we'll have to follow up. Okay, bear with me here. Okay, so I'm going to resume just closing out this section on, Japanese beetles' behavior with certain plant hosts. So I ended up doing some research in graduate school with Dr. Whitney Cranshaw on roses and their attractiveness to certain pollinators. We looked at European honeybees, and certain native bee groups like Halictidae, and the other one, I guess other aphids like bumblebees. But we also looked at incidents of plant damage and presence of beetle on the plants. So we have some interesting slides just going over that quickly, and then I'll dive into more about biocontrol options and natural enemies available in the landscape. And then I'll talk about what's going on out in Grand Junction to close out today. I may run slightly over the hour. It's critical to me to respect your time, but just a heads up, I might be running 5 minutes behind. Just want to be transparent. But roses are obviously a very well-known host, one of the favorites to those adult beetles. There are certain cultivars. We were witnessing, it was kind of an interesting example that was, showcased at a war memorial rose garden. We were noticing there was some roses that just didn't seem attractive, weren't visited by beetles maybe, or by pollinators, but it launched a research question looking into, pollinator activity and looking at plant damage in Littleton. So this is the site of the War Memorial Rose Garden located in Littleton, Colorado. You can see there's lots of incredible cultivars, older perennial roses here. This is obviously a site of memorial. They had volunteers banding together to try to save the roses. This is a site where people come to remember, very important people to them. And they didn't love that they were seeing, thousands of beetles. So they actually were going and running a hand picking program through this area. So that was biasing the data on some level. I do want to say that just as a disclosure, there was constantly beetles being removed from the landscape, 10,000 a day occasionally. So we were going through and doing counts on these plants. This was our research site. So on some level, data was likely impacted by those beetles being absent. It had to have some level of an impact. But here's just some photos with Whitney Cranshaw and some of his lab mates. That's me in graduate school. In this case, we're actually handpicking. We're doing part of that trial, just showing that handpicking is effective. But yeah, these trials were in partnership with South Suburban Parks and Recreation. Here Whitney was very, and still is very active in the community in Japanese beetle work, especially in the biocontrol space. But, initially, he's considered a national expert on Japanese beetle. You can see here he's unearthing grubs with one of the directors of South Suburban. But we really launched this study because we realized that, your nemesis, the Japanese beetle, wants to feed on roses, and our friends, the pollinators of all types, mainly specifically bee pollinators, were tracked for this study. It's somewhat of a management conundrum. How do you spray a flowering plant? Typically, you can't with insecticides. Acelepryn is a unique example. So some of these BT products Lisa's been mentioning, great examples there of the fact that there are some products that you can spray when a plant is flowering, but typically that stops your ability to control the Japanese beetles because you have visiting pollinators. And so we do have several other bees, native bees that visit roses. But just to get to some of the data, we did a matrix. So essentially we looked at different averages of bee visitation on rose cultivars, and then we put that against looking at the damage on those plants. So how did those cultivars, all the black dots, how did they perform based on, average bee visitation and average damage by Japanese beetles? So essentially this kind of breaks down this somewhat complicated figure. In orange, these are the cultivars bees do not really visit. Insecticide options are much greater. So maybe lean towards those. I'll show some examples of the cultivars that fall within these spaces. That red section, red alert cultivars that will be difficult to maintain in a post-Japanese beetle world. So the urban Front Range, where Japanese beetle is a forever problem, just like the East Coast, where populations just are there to stay. Cultivars on the lower end of this matrix, Japanese beetles don't damage. So you could read this matrix and be selecting cultivars for very different uses of those cultivars of roses in the landscape. I'll be moving somewhat quickly through this. Please remember this is recorded. I will not be reading all of the cultivars, but this table here shows, rose cultivars with high Japanese beetle damage, and I'm gonna have to move my little window, and bee visitation. But just keep in mind there's some options here. This table shows, cultivars that were found to have very little Japanese beetle damage or none at all. So if you're looking for, new roses to plant in the landscape and you happen to be in the urban Front Range, Denver metro area, really, it's a lot of places out here now. So keep in mind there are some options. And then to wrap up here, cultivars, which no bees really were noted on, are as follows here. So there's definitely some tools here out of this study. Other, natural enemies, I just want to say overall, natural enemies and biocontrol, I separate those words out. Typically natural enemies is just anything in the landscape that's, naturalized, that's a native insect, maybe an arthropod that is predating on something else. It's its job to balance the ecosystem. That's what it eats for lunch, kind of thing. And then biocontrols or biocontrol agents are going to be the use of certain predators, like a natural enemy, in its landscape, but then you remove it from its landscape, it's commercially bred, and then it's shipped out across the US for use in states that APHIS approves for certain control of pests. So several of these fall into biocontrols, I would say more so than natural enemies, but overall, they are natural enemies of Japanese beetles. So we've talked some on milky spore and its lack of efficacy. We'll cover a little bit more about that today, but I'm going to lean heavily into a few other ones. Ovovesicular papillae is one. This is a microsporidium disease of Japanese beetle. You can see it magnified there on the left hand of the page, but its main observed effects from infection are reduced fecundity and reduced winter survival. So it clogs up all the tubes of the Japanese beetle and it slows it up quite a bit. Does require good moisture, relative humidity that often most of our state lacks due to intense UV light or just the aridity of our environment. We're in the high desert out here. Japanese beetles, when I was in graduate school, Whitney was a part of this at that time where he was working with Michigan, I believe Michigan State, to get beetles that were diseased and ship them to Colorado and spread that disease around. Once it was established on the urban Front Range, at that point, eradication was not an option. And so what could they do to attempt to control the population is introduce a disease to that population. You need to have a surviving population to introduce a biocontrol agent. So if you're actively fighting and killing off a population, biocontrol, it becomes somewhat it's maybe not the right timing for it is the best way to put it. But blended beetles that were diseased were spread around certain sites, and then that was tracked through time to see if that pathogen would still be viable. So here's some photo examples of Japanese beetle milkshake and the way that was applied across the landscape here by, in part, very much so by the Colorado Master Gardener program. And it took. So this was a successful biocontrol attempt and research project that was successful. It's hard to capture exactly what it's doing to the overall population in the Boulder County, for example. That kind of data I lack today, but I can tell you it's a good thing that it was still present in the environment and impacting adult beetles. So that's the goal. Another interesting tachinid fly. So many tachinids are famous for being ectoparasitic. They lay eggs. They become parasitic on another insect that is their host. So the winsome fly, this is a classic example. This is one that is still being attempted on the Front Range, but I believe it's not as common. But we see examples on iNaturalist of folks taking photos of Japanese beetles and they end up having this little white egg on their thorax. And so there is some indication that it does exist here in our population, but maybe not massively so. And I'm not currently involved in the research, so I can't speak to its level of incidence, but I know that efforts are continuing to bring this fly successfully to Colorado. It's an Eastern Coast native, I believe, or at least that's where it's been successful in biocontrol programs. I'm actually not sure where it's from in the world, I should clarify. But biocontrol of Japanese beetle is going to vary across Colorado. So based on where we're actively fighting Japanese beetles in pockets of the state versus where it's here to stay, where it's here to stay, we want to have biocontrol programs actively ongoing. This is, a classic biocontrol program where eradication is not possible, but you want to do what you can to impact that population and lower it. Balancing of the ecosystem, even if it's an invasive that you're trying to balance, you're trying to do what you can. Unlike in areas like where I am at, where we just can't really rely on biocontrol yet because we're actively throwing everything we can at the Japanese beetle to try to prevent it from being a permanent problem. The Palisade insectary is worth a quick mention. I won't say much more than just introducing them, but they're a state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind facility, maybe in the world, definitely in the United States, and how it's funded and the people that are staffed there. This is the Colorado Department of Agriculture facility, but it's also run obviously with funding from USDA. But this is a team of scientists. This is Dan Bean, their director, that they grow a lot of different diseases for killing weeds. That's a huge focus. So it's kind of a center of research for that in the country. And then It's just up the road from me. And they also look at insects and they raise bindweed mites. And it's definitely worth a check of their website. I didn't have time to make a QR code, and forgive me for that. But Palisade Insectary should be relatively easy enough to hopefully type into Google. Bear with me. I'm going to talk about the distribution and some history now, moving into what's happening in Grand Junction. But invasive species obviously alter landscapes. It's when we've moved, whether it's zebra mussels in our water systems, or we're moving Japanese beetle in landscape plants and in nursery trade, or exotic mosquitoes are moved in tires across multiple states. I mean, we move biology around. It's simply unavoidable. I think humans don't unfortunately think a little bit. Proper prior planning goes a long way when you are moving biology around. But when an invasive species, whatever it is, shows up in a new system, it doesn't have any of its natural enemies, none of its predators, parasites, competitors. There's no competition, and it's able to thrive. This beetle is a perfect example of how population sizes, grow very rapidly. Sorry for my photo here, but distribution of trade and commerce is driving the movement of biology. We've got a really incredibly elaborate system, a very intensified system of management of moving everything around, whether it's through e-commerce or bringing geraniums from grandma's over the divide to Grand Junction where I live. There's lots of examples of how we're moving and trading and transporting things. It's how the world is running. There's lots of ways that Japanese beetle RVs could even be circled here. There's a lot of ways Japanese beetles can crawl into a crevice, or Winnie Cranshaw is famous for saying, out of any insect out there, I definitely think that the Japanese beetle is one of the easiest that could crawl into a car and could just end up in a new county. So it's a relatively large beetle, but it's easy enough to end up with one on you, leave your windows down kind of thing. So just being mindful of when you're moving those potted plants, or you see free plants on Facebook Marketplace, or considering the state of Japanese beetle in Colorado, I would consider really all plant material, but would definitely be considerate of plants that Japanese beetle could be living in the roots, or like in the soil, feeding on the roots of that plant. So it may be hidden to you that they're there. That's how they actually ended up in the United States. But keep in mind, this is a regulated process within the Colorado Department of Agriculture. So they are regulating nursery stock. So if you're a registered nursery within the state of Colorado, you have to, depending on where you are, what county is going to matter a lot on what happens to that plant material when it's leaving your county. And if it's one of these urban front range counties where there's lots of Japanese beetles and that material is more likely to be a risk for leaving the county, that material needs to be treated. So costs go up. So having a quarantine on those counties is somewhat of it's a disadvantage if you're a producer of plants, or a salesman of plants here on the urban front range. So just keep all that in mind. Distribution within the U.S., you can see it's very much established where we get a lot of precipitation and humidity on the eastern half of the U.S. It was initially found in around 1916 after potted nursery stock was brought for the World's Fair in New Jersey. It rapidly expanded from there. It's just an out of control forever problem there. And it's becoming more of a westward issue. Washington State is fighting it. Oregon is fighting it in certain areas. Colorado is fighting it in Mesa County. You can see that it's somewhat of a patchwork. But the introduction into Colorado occurred in the really early 1990s via nursery stock purchased from the Midwest. So classic. Established in pockets of well-irrigated landscapes and golf courses. This is the favorite landscape of the Japanese beetle. I mean, we have peach growers and we have cherry growers and we have wine grape growers that are very, very concerned about their multi-million-dollar industries in Western Colorado, but truly it's going to thrive in the urban area. So having found it, which I'll get into, in our urban area, that's really where it's kind of in a pocket right now in an urban area. So we have the ability to go in and run a treatment program. But well-known areas is the Denver metro area. It's spread up to Fort Collins, and I'm not quite sure if it's farther than Pueblo. It's possible that it is. It wouldn't shock me if it's farther south than Pueblo, Colorado. But it might not be so. So I'm not sure on that one. You can see the distribution here. This is somewhat out of date. I needed I couldn't figure out how to update this, and it's not my data, but we do have a pocket out in Grand Junction that we do have a reproducing population in that area of the state, but it's an active eradication zone declared by Mesa County. So local government's doing a lot to try to do what they can. But you can see that urban Front Range, we have 80% of our population. We've got a lot of problems with the Japanese beetle. Just giving you some history in our area. So I'm 29 miles from the Utah border out here in Grand Junction. And in 2002, so, 20 plus years ago, we had a master gardener detect Japanese beetle in this valley of tree fruit growers. So wine grape growers, it's historically been a heritage, post-Civil War era fruit community. I mean, the Roller Dam diverts water to all of Mesa County. It's an incredible agricultural valley. Becoming urban, but still lots of ag out here, out west. And it actually was detected within one of the only pest districts for insect protection for fruit growers in the country. So it's within the Upper Grand Valley Pest Control District. This was initially detected. That gave them a lot of county resources immediately to say, this is a pest we do not want in a fruit growing region. We need to get this out of here. We need to treat lawns for the grubs because that's the best, most effective way to remove this from the population quickly. And Brant Harrison, he was a young man at the time. He's recently passed stomach cancer. I really want to just honor him today in this part of the talk. He was an incredible fruit grower for many years. His sons have inherited his company, Cocopelli Farms, out in Palisade. He had inherited an ag leadership project at the time when this beetle was detected in his home, in the valley he was calling home. And he went to work. He did a great job rallying the, town of Palisade, the Chamber of Commerce, CSU Extension, Mesa County, the Pest District. It was incredible, and they were successful. It's one of the most well-documented success stories of removing an invasive species in a tree fruit area, I would argue, maybe in the country. It's well known. This data speaks for itself. It's over, almost 22 years old now. We haven't updated it the last few years. Forgive me, I'll share some additional data to help with that, but just keep in mind that they were able to remove this reproducing population of Japanese beetle through community efforts, and it was gone by 2029 in efforts to trap the beetle in our area, where we have, over $100 million in peaches alone annually. This was a big deal. This was a win for the area. And so when it arrived, again, 2 decades later in the urban area of Grand Junction, you can imagine the heartbreak and the fear that a lot of folks faced that had seen a success story, all for it just to show back up again. And this is a very mobile pest. We're constantly moving plant material around. As I mentioned, our valley is growing. It is urbanizing. Subdivisions are getting put in. And frankly, with turf farms closing because it's more valuable in solar or in subdivision, unfortunately, we're having to move more turf into our area from out of area. And so it's not 100% certain that this was detected. It was detected based on, in a new subdivision, we can make some assumptions, but we can't ever know for sure if it was just someone driving Japanese beetles in their car, and then those beetles got free, started to have some fun, had babies, and then became an established population. But because there's a nursery that's trapping every year very close to this multiple subdivision region, all of a sudden they went from having 0 beetles, 0 beetles, 0 beetles, 0 beetles to several dozen. Boom, red alert went off in our mind. And, we put additional traps out into the neighborhood because the nursery initially may have been to blame, but it was found very clearly. The data was able to show a fine, actually a very clear line, that it was coming from the neighborhood where turf was just getting put in off semis coming from either the Salt Lake area, Denver area. We don't know. It doesn't matter. It was coming from somewhere far away that had a Japanese beetle infestation. So this is many agencies putting this map together. This was our first real year of looking at this project and showing how by using traps in an area where you don't have established populations, you are able to use that data to inform decision making and where that population is distributed. So just keep in mind that early detection and getting the ear of commissioners through fruit industry concerns. There was, motivated an ordinance to basically make the Japanese beetle a nuisance pest in Mesa County. They were able to get through, a consent-based approach. They've now, they're treating even more acres this year, but there's a massive area of turf grass that's receiving treatment. They're using acelepryn, so it's a reduced risk pesticide and highly selective just on those grubs, safe on your children's bare feet once it's dry, safe on the pets. It is a spray, so some perception of pesticides being sprayed. We've had over 90% compliance in Mesa County. This is a multi-year treatment program at this point. They've contracted out through WD Yards. They deserve a lot of credit. They've come in and been very organized, have run a really tight ship, and have made a successful treatment across all this acreage that has, on some level, we know there's an infestation in this area. And I think the goal of the county is to eradicate the Japanese beetle. From my perspective, it's hard to stop biology, but everyone is doing what they can to support the county's efforts because it's a one-time opportunity we have to get rid of the Japanese beetle. So a treatment program is within these boundaries. If you're a resident in Grand Junction, where 90% of the population really was detected initially, was on private property in an urban area, the county is paying for treatment. It's not even a cost share program. They are saying they will pay for it. They want to get rid of the Japanese beetle before it spreads back to their district in Palisade, where they have a lot of stakeholders that want their livelihoods protected. So by applying this product on the lawn in May, it has this residual effect that as even future mated pairs of beetles land on that lawn months later, lay eggs, those eggs become unviable, and they also become, if they do survive to be a larvae, then they essentially don't mature. It's very impactful. And so, yeah, consider that was kind of the perfect tool for the problem is how I would look at it. I want to briefly go over just the partners, but Mesa County and WD Yards, their partner, are running a treatment program in Grand Junction to attempt to eradicate the Japanese beetle. They're a very strong partner. They're our state agency, Colorado, I'll speak a little bit on this, is a local control state. So it really fell on local government to deal with this problem based on our Pest Control Act. But I want to really acknowledge that the Colorado Department of Agriculture has been there every step of the way, in every way they can legally be there, helping to support the county. They were able to get $100,000 in grant money to the county last year. So they're definitely supportive, and they're doing so by trapping for the Japanese beetle. And we're using these traps not to control that population, but to know where there are adults being found, and then using a radius around that location to treat certain number of homes that fall within that boundary. CSU Extension's been an active part of identifying Japanese beetle larvae or mass Schaefer larvae, depending on what's coming out of lawns. There's been work to look at residual effect of acelepryn in soils, and it is long lasting. It's impressive, really. But master gardeners are doing education on a regular basis all summer long, as well as my entomology program. So many county partners here. The county is our leader, but we've got the city of Grand Junction doing an incredible amount. We've got the colleges treating, we've got country clubs treating, HOAs, churches, the public school district. It's been a massive collaboration. I think the other day I had someone in the city of Grand Junction say they thought this was the largest collaborative effort to get rid of at least a pest that the valley has ever seen, the Grand Valley out here in Grand Junction. So remember that these traps are, different agencies are setting traps out in our area to detect the beetle, but it's a united front. So my program initially was running citizen scientists. We were managing them to help trap in areas that the CDA really couldn't get to. And the CDA was looking in on that zone where we knew there was reproducing populations. So it's a team effort, but hundreds of traps are going out, actually over 500 in this year alone went out. And every year since, I think it's stayed around 450 to 500 traps per year across Grand Junction, which is a heavily trapped area. So we have good data on where they're distributed. This map's produced in ArcGIS Pro from my mapping guru, Melissa Franklin. I want to give her credit. All her mapping ability has allowed for us to build this network of traps for both the CDA and CSU. She's able to map them on one map. So in blue, you can see the CDA traps. And in that yellow square in the center, if you can see it, there's actually hundreds of traps there. They're all layered on each other. I can't unlayer them. But you can see the green traps that help make up a network of traps around Mesa County. And you can see how the blue kind of starts to end up in different areas. And that was because throughout the season, we were able to detect Japanese beetles, and then the CDA placed additional traps. So it's very much a collaborative effort on getting traps where they need to go so that we know where we should be recommending treatments. And like I said, it's recommending. I mean, this is a consent-based program, and we've had tremendous success with folks agreeing and consenting to treatment or to trapping on their property. Just kind of some highlights. You can see here how when a CSU trap was able to detect a problem, CDA came in, and then we've learned more about the distribution. But there's been so little in these 4 spaces. I just want to acknowledge that it really is centralized in that that triangle. Sorry, not triangle. Getting tired. The rectangle there. Some quick numbers here. You can see initially, when we had gotten out traps, basically at the end of when adults would even be flying, we only caught several hundred in 2022. This is Department of Agriculture data they've given me to share today. Our data starts feeding in 2023 when, we found almost 6,000 beetles across the valley. And that was really concerning. Some people find 25,000 when they initially set traps out. And it's still possible to reduce that population. So Mesa County took on the challenge with their partners, of course, and they've had a pretty tremendous success this year. I mean, I'm not holding my breath yet. I think this is a multi-year trapping program, but we've reduced it by 87% of flying adults from 2023 to 2024. So 2025 definitely will be an interesting one. Everyone's committed, just for the sake of time. I'm not going to read through this, but people are committing public outreach funds. People are definitely continuing treatment across the Grand Valley. So the federal quarantine on the Japanese beetle was dropped several years back, meaning there was just unfortunately less support for states like Colorado and Department of Agriculture across the US that are fighting invasive pests. And we additionally are a local control state here in Colorado, meaning under our Colorado Pest Control Act, we unfortunately all responsibility for pests on private property, it falls upon local government. So folks like at the county and city level, not at the state level, though our state Department of Ag has been incredibly helpful despite the legislation here. Just a reminder, buy local and plant local. Purchasing plant material and turf grass from out of area is more risky to you as a private property owner. As someone that is working with plants, just take that extra bit of time to think through, is it worth the risk moving, all this plant material from Philadelphia, etc. So depends on what you're buying, right? But try to limit how far it's going. Just want to thank the efforts, not thank the efforts, but thank the team that are making efforts to get rid of the Japanese beetle in Mesa County. We will see. I want to be fully supportive of my county partners. Biology is hard to stop, and we have Japanese beetle in other areas of Colorado coming into our area all the time. So we have to do a lot of work to just educate folks on not continuing to move or to make smarter purchases, especially like landscape contractors is one of the hardest groups to get into contact with. So in interesting ways through working with realtors or HOAs, maybe CDOT, there's definitely angles where we could be trying to have a longer term conversation about the movement of this pest within the state of Colorado. And then there's some resources available. And I'm sorry that I went over time. Thank you for remaining if you stayed on this long.
Definitely. Thank you, Melissa, for this presentation and letting us know the updates from the Western Slope on Japanese beetle. We do have 2 questions. The first one is it true that Japanese beetles won't survive above 66,000 feet? Is that true, or is that just a myth?
It's a great question. I can comment on it. I don't have exact data, but it would not shock me if in the city of Aspen, they had Japanese beetle in irrigated turf grass lawns. I mean, they don't. It's not currently there, but it's possible in an irrigated turf grass system to get Japanese beetles at elevation. I don't know the highest Japanese beetles caught in the state of Colorado. That would be fascinating information to dig into. So I won't speak too out of turn here, but I do think that It's very possible. And I've asked experts like Whitney Cranshaw this exact question. He said the exact same thing I'm regurgitating to you, which is it wouldn't shock him if it ended up in a mountain community because of that irrigated turf grass system. The cold temperatures likely needed to, kill off sustained populations of Japanese beetle, and insulated soil is going to be, fortunately, just cold temperatures we just are not seeing as commonly, at least over the last decade of our climate in the state. Which is why we've had a lot of bark beetle problems and a lot of other pest problems, is we're just not seeing the sustained periods of cold to lead to kill off of certain populations. But I guess it wouldn't surprise me, but I don't have an example is maybe my answer.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't think it will surprise anybody, really, if there is a lot of plant transportations and people with irrigated lawns, like you're saying. So thank you for that. And this is more my question based on everything that you said. When do you think the government or the partners in the Western slope will move phase from now that they are eradicating to saying, like, oh my God, this is a bigger problem, different methods needs to happen, or is it
Yeah, like
right into the fruit
when do they
production?
yeah, like when do they maybe stop efforts, or
Yeah,
what is the decision that, they obviously have this impending decision upon them, and
yes.
they're using trap data to feed all decisions they're making. It's something I've really encouraged them to do, is like we have built this elaborate network of trapping. It's a multi-agency collaboration, and with an 87% reduction in adult flight. And that's maybe not, at least adults captured, I should say. It's 87% reduction in flying adults captured across Mesa County from 2023 to 2024. That's positive to the county. They want to continue to invest part of their budget into trying to prevent this before it just is a forever issue. I mean, if they're able to get the numbers very low, it's possible they can just have more control of the spread. I mean, slowing it down is still a positive thing to the county. I think eradication is the goal, but obviously working on just a control program at its roots is an important thing to focus on as well. But it will hopefully all be informed by the trap data, and they'll be in by the fact that, especially this year, because we're going to create a very extensive grid, even more so, it won't be just random citizen scientists covering. I mean, it'll be very much a grid. Like every so often there is a trap in Mesa County. And we hope that that will serve as kind of a foundation for decision making, as it has in the past, so that they can be guided in their pursuits if they want to continue to pursue this at the county level. So we'll see.
Yeah, and that's probably part of why in the Front Range, which is so widespread, we cannot really work that way, eradicate it that way. And I think Lisa covered that question as well. But I'd like to thank everybody for staying on 15 minutes. Please complete our class survey. It's important to us that you give us feedback and we can continue doing these efforts into identification and management of these pests in Colorado. So we'll see you next week with IPM in the Western Slope. Mel, you will talk about it. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good weekend. Have a good bye.